As New London celebrates its 350th year, we too look back and acknowledge with gratitude the opportunities available to the Jewish community living here. Arriving as immigrants, we became part of the city's vibrant mixture while retaining our own particular religion, culture, and affection for Israel.
Listen to the mosaic of voices recalling how we came and how we are still coming, what we found here, and how we have lived.
My father spoke many languages, and he was a Hebrew scholar, self-taught, never stopped studying.
Where was he born?
He was born in a little village somewhere in Russia. My mother was born in a bigger town. I think oh, wait a minute. My mother and her whole family were Valkyriskels.
Well, my father got here in 1896. I don't know exactly when my mother got here, I think the same year. But I haven't found it yet down there in the archives. I haven't found the ship that she got here on.
Mm-hmm. And what year did they get married?
They got married in 1899, Labor Day, right out here in Waterford on Kaplan's farm.
My father arrived in New York City, Ellis Island, on July 4th, 1905. He remembered the date very well because they wouldn't let them get off the boat, and he was sure they were sending them back to Europe. It was just because it was a national holiday, one that he didn't recognize, on July 4th. So it was on July 5th that they left the boat and came to New London because they had lined up jobs in a cigar factory here.
Then I got a call that said we just had a visit of a rabbi from New London, Connecticut. He said that there was a piano teacher in New London who left, and he had quite a following. He had at least 30 students. And if somebody else would come in, he probably could pick up those students. So I looked it up in the dictionary. New London had the faint idea where it was, and it was not very far away from New York, so I figured I could always come back. It had a women's college with 700 girls in it, so I didn't think it would be too bad. So I took a chance, and I said, okay, I'll go. The Jewish community had a committee that would welcome refugees and help them. You know, first. They came, they were at the station, there were a couple of people at the station. Blassenberg, the father, and then Heloise Joel. Do you remember her at all? Well, Heloise Joel. And they had rented a room for me on Montauk Avenue. And I stayed there for a little while, but I found another room that I liked better where there was a piano. And that would allow me to take in students. And I did pick up, in a very short time, I had 30 students or more. So, and then one of the students was Francis Sheriff. And I always thought there was a little bit of matchmaking behind, that we became engaged, we got married the next year, 1942. So that's how I got to the United States, how I got to New London. Just fate, I guess, what happens to you.
I couldn't find myself in New York. And when I came to New London after the first 2 days, I realized that the people in New London are used to living in a small city. And this was my path. I was raised in a small city. And at that point, I felt really very good. But after a while, I understood that I don't have any friends. And I'm completely alone in that city. That it's going to be difficult. Well, first of all, I am a survivor, and I will have somehow to make friends in the American Jewish community. But in a while, I got very lucky. What happened? One day, Lou and Evelyn walked into my showroom. I walked out really excited that perhaps I am on the way of meeting other people. And it happened.
Where did your father come from? Did you know?
He came from Minsk,
From Minsk.
and my mother came from Minsk. They were next door neighbors.
Really?
Yeah. And he came in 1910 to a brother, a half-brother. And then he sent for my mother in 1912. And she came over, and she worked in a shoe factory, I think, packing boxes, packing shoes in boxes. And they got married in 1914. And I was born in 1915. And in 1917, we went to New London, because he had friends from Europe that lived in New London, and they told him to come and open up a business.
My father was Charles Glassenberg, who came over from Minsk, Russia, somewhere at the turn of the century. Regrettably, neither my sister nor brother I know exactly when, but he was a young fellow, about 13 or 14 when he came. Why he landed in New London, none of us know that. The rest of his family was off and went to Chicago. Dad came here, and one way or another, eventually he got into the newspaper business, in that he became a distributor for newspapers and magazines, and he had the franchise for them, and the property grew that he had got the franchises for, till it got to be really a big concern, and of course it's called the New London News Company, and my brother, as we speak anyhow, is still the owner of the New London News Company.
The plane was late and we came maybe 3 o'clock in the
3
morning.
a.m.
Yes, and we were so surprised. The table was set and a lot of people were in the room, my daughter's room. We didn't know them. It was the Jewish people who came earlier a little. It was sofa pies. She prepared a lot of food, and Kamieniecki and who was a lot of people. And we were very surprised that everybody was so, friendly. They met us so friendly. And a day later, we went to the Jewish Federation. And
Jerry Fischer.
Yes, and they met us so friendly, and the faces were smiling, and the people were smiling, and it was a very special feeling that you have friends.
My father worked 18, 19 hours a day, 7 days a week. I met a man recently who remembers when his parents had a farm in Stonington, and my father with his horse and wagon on occasion would stay in this farm. And when my dad woke up in the morning, they had his horse with him in the barn on the farm, and they always had a pail of water for the horse. When he woke up in the morning, the pail of water was frozen solid. So there he was, sleeping in a barn on the hay with whatever clothes he had, with the horse, and then working and trying to support himself in America and raise a family. I don't know if I could have done that.
My grandfather, I told you, he had a farm when he first moved up here. A big customer took a pint of milk a day. And they never had fresh milk at home. They always used the sour milk for themselves. But he used to milk the cows on Friday and dump the milk out behind the barn. And I remember asking him why, if he was such a poor man and he couldn't afford to have fresh milk himself, he would dump the milk out behind the barn. And he would say to me, "You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, but you had a right to work to relieve the animals of the pain. If I kept the milk He said, I would never know that I relieve the animals or that I want the profit. If I dumped out the milk, then I knew that I was doing it for the right reason. It was okay.
Many a time we didn't know where to get a chicken. We had certain people, I'd say to a certain man, Mr. So-and-so, gee, I gotta have 10 chickens. He'll bring in the 10 chickens. Our credit wasn't that good in the beginning. The name wasn't that. We didn't have the money. We didn't have the flow of money where we could go to these different farmers that, oh, I don't want to trust you. But we built up a nice, enviable name, reputable name, where we could do these things. Then there were people in the slaughtering business that helped us. We had a slaughterer in Colchester who loved my father and loved him for his honesty. And remember now, we had nothing. Whatever we took in, we paid out. If we had a little profit, it stayed behind. And this man used to come in every Saturday or Sunday and collect. And if my father got on the phone and said to him, sir, I just don't have it this week, never questioned him.
My father had a different view of life. He was not a businessman. But to him, to perform a mitzvah was above all else. So my father would drive out to the country when he was called for a circumcision, a bris, to sometimes shecht cows or chickens. And then he would return home and my mother would say, "Nu, what did you earn today? You killed 3 chickens. What did they give you?" "Well, the farmer didn't have any money today." "You went all that way with gasoline and time to Uncasville, to Colchester, just to slaughter 3 chickens for nothing?" He said, "Well, you had to perform the mitzvah anyway. It had to be done." There was no question about any of this for my father. The car went, and that's how he lived his life.
When I got my license and was delivering orders for my father, all these kids were unemployed, just out of school, going to school. Years ago, he had a running board on the truck. "Come on, Bruno, this one, come on." They jump on, we deliver orders. We'd go down Linden Street. We had, if it wasn't our customer, Freeman's, we had first floor, second floor, third floor. This kid would go there with 3 bundles. Reuben, this one, that one, this would go here. And every street, little package. Everybody bought fresh meat. A lot of customers that we went to, we had to be careful. We got the bundle up there quick, dropped it and ran. Because they always opened the package and discriminated.
Want to send something back.
Want to send something back.
Of course, Sukkot was a fancy time for us too, because we had a big sukkah down next to the shul with pine boughs on the top, because there were 3 or 4 Jewish carpenters who put the thing together.
Do you remember who that would be?
Yeah, Moshke, the big, he was a huge man, Lubchansky. His brother Nathan was a contractor. David Lubchansky, that's Irving Lubchansky's father, was also a carpenter. My father was an electrician. Louis Margolis was a plumber. And all these people all went to Avid Chesed.
The beach was a very short boardwalk from the water. And in one section there were these little restaurants, Izzy's, Jack's, Clifford's, bowling alleys. Rakowski had a pinball machine type of thing, a store there. There was this dance land that had the big bands that came in on Sunday nights because there was a special area that they allowed Sunday night dancing. Glen Gray, Casa Loma, Glen Gray, Duke Ellington.
Did you go?
No, I was working. And it was interesting because I was working at Izzy's, and in intermission, the band people, including Duke Ellington and some of the other very famous people, used to come downstairs to Izzy's to get a hot dog. And I would serve them there. Work was very, very difficult because we had worked 10, 12 hours a day. Salary was meager in those days, $8, $10 a week for 60, 70 hours of work. But I had a job, and the job was important.
My father, really and truly, you could call a philanthropist. He gave to everything. I mean, he certainly gave to Jewish causes,
but he gave to everything and to everyone. I mean, that was the way that was actually the way he lived.
Well, Pesach, let me tell you about Pesach in our house. My mother, in order to make a great Pesach for her kids, used to sell matzah out of the house. There was no room to move in the house. The house was all kashet, and she had, I remember the Maya London Company, the boxes were never made solid, and the matzah meal used to fall out of the corners. That was a poor operation, Maya London. Manischewitz was better. Goodman's egg matzah was the best egg matzah. Well, Molly had all of these things. In order to make it very special, Molly used to make her own sponge cake to sell to the fancy ladies in town. It's just before Pesach. It's maybe 5 or 6 days before the first Seder. And she's making some knedlach. And she forgot to leave the batter overnight in the icebox. Remember, we didn't have an electric icebox now. She had it in the icebox, but she didn't leave it in long enough. So she made the knedlach and she wanted me to sample the knedlach. Well, I'll never forget how embarrassed she was. They were hard like rocks. So I said, Ma, these are just, they're not going to make it. I said, what is it? What's the matter? I said, Ma, usually you make them so fluffy that you can't stop eating them. I says, schwere Steine. I said, hard like rocks. She says, what are you talking about? I said, Ma, I'll show you in a minute. There was a dog in the backyard running. I opened the window and I hit him right in the head. I said, Ma, I nearly killed the dog. Well, she was so embarrassed, I'll never forget. I thought she would go right through the kitchen floor. She didn't spank me or anything because she used me as I said, Ma, you asked me to sample them. I saved you from making a worse mistake for everybody else. She said, you better make another batch. Sure enough, and they came out the way they always did. The first synagogue was the Avet Chesed on Federal Street. Well, they were somewhere else before, but then they were on Federal Street. My father was a Russian. These were all Litvaks, they called them. I don't know why, I guess they come from the Lithuania section. My father was a Russian. There were a lot of other Russians in town. The Wine family, the Eliansky family, the Belgrade family, Traceman's, Wachinskis, hard to remember. They decided they didn't want to go to that synagogue. They built their own, and that's why they had the Old Shalom on Blindman Street, because of the friction between the Litvaks and the Russians. We lived, I told you, on Main Street, where my father had a store. On Bradley Street, John Street, Douglas Street, there were a lot of Russians and Poles, mainly Polish people living there, and our relationship with them was excellent. We went to school with them. We played ball with them when we could. My father did a lot of business with them.
One other memory I have when you talk about Pesach that I have to tell you. My mother was a teacher, not only through her teaching tales that she taught me many lessons and messages through those stories, but she was also always aware of anti-Semitism. She was aware that we were the only Jewish family in this entire neighborhood for years, except for the Gruskins, Sam and Estelle Gruskin, but they moved in after us on the corner of Vauxhall and Channing Street. So when we moved in, the Dreyfus family lived here, it's true, but they were German Jews. They were not, the Jewish Jews of our ilk. And, really identifiable as Jews. So my mother wanted to teach everyone about what we were, who we were. Pesach came every year. A week before Pesach, or a few days before Pesach, my mother would prepare a bag, a paper grocery bag, with a bottle of Manischewitz wine and a box of matzahs in each bag. And she would hand me the bag and she'd say, go to the Castaldis and explain Pesach to them. So I'd go to the Castaldis next door, the Italian family who owned the house, and I would have to tell them what the matzahs were, what the wine was, what Pesach was. Go to the Edgars next door, 2 doors away in the White Cottage. I'd go to the Edgars. I'd go to the Birdsalls. I'd go to the other Edgar family on Granite Street, to the corner house, to the Morses, Dr. and Mrs. Morse next door with their 4 sons. And I was a shy little girl, and I kind of felt a little bit awkward about this task.
I was going to say embarrassing thing as a young kid, taking matzah to school, because if we brought lunch, we certainly weren't going to bring a sandwich. So it was matzah, and then you had to explain to other kids what that was all about. And kids can be cruel, and we had our share of that, of cruel kids. Yeah, I lived in a neighborhood without a lot of Jewish people, and so that I had perhaps what are the typical confrontations with other kids, little kids who wanted to be nasty or wanted to be cruel to the little Jew boy.
Our next door neighbors when we were on Chapel Street were the Doherty family, and their daughter was married to a Coast Guard officer, a Winslow Buxton, and his son and I were those childhood chums, you know, absolutely welded at the hip. And we were within 30 days of each other and just grew up. And I can still remember one day, he had to go to church. And the day before, I hadn't been able to play with him in the morning because I had to go to services. And there's that little chapel down there, Pequot Chapel, and I said to him, well, you know, why do you have to go way up there, which is St. Joe's? Why can't you just go here? You'll be done and we can go play. He said, I can't go in there. It's different. I said, how can it be different? You know, you're Christians. You worship Jesus or whatever I was saying to differentiate between what he and I were doing. And he was trying to explain to me that it was different. Of course, how were we to know how to do it? We were so little. And then he said, well, why don't you go there? And of course, I had no good answer for him other than, no, we don't go there. We go to Bethel, which was in those days on Black Hall Street.
We moved on to John Street. We lived in an environment of Jews, Polish people, Russian people, colored people, Filipino people, and we all harmonized as one.
It was
we
predominantly a Polish and Russian neighborhood.
We played together. We went to school together. And in the area that we lived, I think only one boy out of all the kids in that area, we all finished high school, and a lot of them went to college. They became doctors, businessmen, all the different things.
There was no hatred those days. We had my brother Lester had a black friend, always came up to the house for dinner. Well, maybe we did call him something, but tomorrow we were playing together. You know? It's not like today he was Polish. All my friends were Polish and Russian.
When we called each other derogatory names, it was mostly meant in jest. You know, like you Polak, you Jew. There was a common expression years ago, Żydek. But it was taken in jest. It wasn't profane.
We may have just had a little argument now, but 10 minutes later we were playing baseball or going swimming together, you know, down across the river and across the tracks in the river by the market.
I guess when I became a teenager, I wanted so much to sing with a choir that I joined the choir at Bethel, the conservative synagogue. Now, it was Friday nights at night to go to Bethel, which was at that time on Black Hall Street, about a mile from here. I couldn't walk by myself. So my father would return from shul. The Orthodox shul had Friday night services to start the Shabbat just before and after sundown. He would come home, he would make Kiddush, we would eat Shabbos dinner, the first meal, and then about 8 o'clock, he would walk with me to Congregation Bethel, and he would sit in the back while I joined Cantor Eliezer Bernstein's choir. And it was joyous for me. Victor Norman played on the organ and conducted the choir. And I guess that was how I expressed my joy, by singing with that choir.
Life centered around Bethel. If it was a simcha, if it was a bat mitzvah or a bar mitzvah, everybody baked and everybody went. And everybody participated. It was just like a sense of family. And if, God forbid, there was a funeral or something bad, everybody went. There seemed to be a link between all of us at that time.
When I was growing up in New London around the 1920s, there was only one synagogue in New London, and that was the hub of the Jewish population. Everything centered about Congregation Ahavas Chesed. That was, as I said, there was only that one synagogue. Bethel didn't come until, I guess, 1932 or something, of which my uncle started, Mr. Lubo. But as I said before, the Congregation Ahavas Chesed was the center of the Jewish activities. No, everything centered about the congregation there. The people, the families. Saturday came, I had to go to Shabbos, I had to go to shul every Saturday. There was no question about that. And as time went by, the population grew and grew and grew, and necessitated the advent of the other synagogue and the Reform Temple. And that's how it is.
All I know is that there were 5 couples, and from the five couples, and 10 of us, we began the temple. We began meeting in each other's homes. I don't know if you ever knew Alex Schindler. He would come and encourage us and say, it's wonderful what you're doing. If this is what you want, then by all means work for it. And many of our friends who were members of Bethel and Ahavas Chesed encouraged us too. I think they were glad to see that we were turning towards a religion. Whether we were with them or not, it didn't matter.
You know, the first time in my life I opened the door to the synagogue in New London. It was the first synagogue I saw in my life.
And it's hard for us. Look, we don't know Hebrew. They're praying in Hebrew.
Sometimes in English
Yes.
we understand, we can
Yes,
read.
but in Hebrew, we don't know it.
Nobody never taught us in Hebrew.
To study Hebrew right now, that's too hard for us. We have to study it.
But it's a special feeling when you
Mhm.
come to the synagogue. It's like you come to the God.
Our house was a clubhouse, and as I said before, it was a mixed neighborhood. It was mostly, there were Italians and Poles and Germans and Irish. There weren't very many Jews. And as a result, for a short time in my life, I had anti-Semitic feelings, because you accept the values of most of the people in your neighborhood. And my mother didn't know it. There was a little guy that had a little grocery store across the street from me. And I one time made a little remark that he felt was anti-Semitic, for which he took me over his knee and spanked me, and dragged me across the street to the house and told my mother what I had said, whereupon she spanked me. And Harry explained to me, he didn't just spank me, he explained to me why, what was wrong with what I had done. And I never, and I grew up in a neighborhood where I had my own, I'd gotten out of it, but early in life I had my own anti-Semitic feelings, because if I weren't a Jew, I'd be more acceptable. And it wasn't until, and I was very young when that happened, when Harry Bunting disabused me of that. It was a very, very important lesson. Very, very, very important lesson. And he said, you have to be proud of what you are. Never let anyone put you down.
They didn't like what's going on in the day paper, because Mr. Bodenwein was very anti-Semitic. So if something happened, he says, Mr. John, whatever the name was, a Jew. Or he used to say, Mr. So-and-so, a black. So in 1938 or 39, the Jews got together, all the Jewish businessmen, and they decided that they're going to take a stand. They took a stand, and they broke that. They went to see Bodenwein. They told him they're going to all stop advertising in a day, going to boycott the paper unless he stops that practice. And he stopped.
Talking about anti-Semitism,
Maybe Sigmund didn't notice it, but there, years ago, I don't know if it still exists, there was a lingering anti-Semitism in that golf course. Bitter anti-Semites. Not many of them, but some of them were very bitter anti-Semites. In fact, originally, no Jew was allowed to become a member until...
Which club is this?
New London Country Club. No Jew was allowed to become... Finally, when Ribikov was governor and he lived in New London, they made him an honorary member. And then when Harvey Mallow was mayor, he was made a member. And bit by bit, we were allowed to join up. And not only that, there was an economic reason. They raised their dues, and a lot of the fellows who had been Gentiles who had been members, they were ordinary mail clerks, plumbers, artisans. They couldn't afford it. So they lost membership, and they were looking for membership. And the Jews joined and helped them. That was one of the reasons they allowed Jews to come in the country club.
We were in Jennings, which was 8th grade, and at the end of the year, all prizes were given, and as I said, I was a big one for doing everything and all that sort of stuff. So some of the prizes you get, you know, you figured, well, I worked for that. I guess I deserved it. Who knows? But this one was especially nice because this one was a good citizenship award, and this had to be given, you know, for the student in the classroom. They felt, for whatever reasons, exemplified good citizenship. They still give it. I think I saw it just the other day that what kids were given it by the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution. So after all the stuff was, and they announced that I had won the DAR one, EJG 1938 for there, I was very touched, you know, and thrilled with that, and I've even kept it. I had a couple of other ones, but somehow this one I've kept. Well, the story that I'm bringing out is years later, long after I was married, and, you know, got to know some of the other folks in town except my friends, my folks' friends, and did an awful lot in the community, so got to know all kinds of people in all different ways, and made friends with all kinds of people because that's what one must do, what should do, and I did it and liked to do it. But anyhow, this sort of older lady, who was very definitely a member of the DAR type, came up to me and smiling as sweetly and meaning it as much of a compliment that you can imagine, said, "Oh, Fuzzy, I was going through some of the DAR records, and I see that you won the DAR Good Citizenship Medal in 1938. Now, wonderful. I didn't know they gave it to little Jewish girls."
There was no conflict. Anti-Semitism was no part of my life ever, all the way through. I was always aware of it. When I went to Yale, I knew there was a quota then. I doubt if there's a quota now, but I knew there was a quota then. I had no feeling about that in Buckley.
When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I started to go out with the Pushkas every Sunday morning. And we used to meet on Plant Street, Mr. Mallow's house on the doorsteps. And Sam Cheddar was in charge of the Jewish National Fund, and he used to give us a pep talk. And I'd go from house to house. I'd have my own route. I'd get nickels, and then I got better. I got dimes, quarters. And I like to go on record saying the first dollar bill I ever got was from Ezekiel Spitz. Gave me $1, and he lived on Ocean Avenue between Fair Harbor and Perry Street. And I ran all the way from there to Mallow's house waving my $1 because I was such a hero. I had $1. So I would say the leader of the nationalistic Zionist group here in London was Maris Malov, Sam Chadov, David Alter till he died, Abe Kirschenbaum, Ted Washington, Ben Kaplan. Abe Schumann volunteered for the Jewish Legion in World War I. And he was the hero of the Zionist group here. He came home from the war, and he fought in the Jewish Legion under Allenby. So he was our local hero.
My grandfather, who lived on Forsyth Road, allowed them to put up a radio station that was connected with Palestine, because it was before Israel, and there was barbed wire around it. And there was armed guards that I recall as a kid. We weren't allowed to go anywhere near it. And there was a lot of gun smuggling, and they would warn them when the ships were coming in and things of this sort.
I remember a little earlier than that, the Jewish war veterans getting arms for the Haganah. Well, I just know that they wanted it and they needed to get them there, and there was an embargo, of course, so that you couldn't. And I remember I had 2 souvenirs I brought home, a rifle and a gun. You know, soldiers bring home souvenirs. And I think I gave them to Leo Walensky, who was collecting at the time. And Harold Weiner was involved with that, I know, too.
My mother continued to write letters to her family in Russia throughout the years, and then I took it up when she became in a situation where she could no longer read or write. And that's how I went to Russia and found her family, and that's how some of them are now in the United States.
My wife and I were coming north on the train with my granddaughter, and Saul Bernstein's widow was on the train with us, and Saul was a very good friend of mine. And we were talking, and she was telling us about Russian immigrants in New London. And when I got home, I had a letter from Literacy Volunteers asking me to take a Russian family, and it turned out to be the Grozaks. And I did, and I was so charmed by the Grozak family that I wanted to get better acquainted with the Russian community.
There was a push to go to America fast in the spring of 1990. Our daughter left in 1989, and in 1990, the first time in my life, I decided to go from Russia. There for a week or 2 weeks, all the time, they spoke that will be a Jewish pogrom.
They mentioned a day when it had to be.
Yes, on Sunday, I forgot, in the spring,
Yes.
1919.
Yes, in May.
We, of course, stayed in our house,
But nobody slept in that day.
No, but to defend myself and my wife, I brought from downstairs, from the basement, a big axe.
I was born in New London. I lived in New London. And then I lived elsewhere for a short while. But you really don't appreciate New London unless you can compare it to something. Well, I can compare it to 3 or 4 years in New York. And I tell you, the luckiest day in my life was when I came back here. And there's nothing wrong with living in New London. I highly recommend it.
You meet people you have never seen them, and everybody say hello, and everybody
They're
is
friendly with
yes.
a smile.
You cannot see it.
We're not used to that.
Yes, we were in New York, in Boston, in big cities. The people are formal. It's not like here. When Paul came, my grandson once came home from Salomon Schechter Academy, and he said to me, "You know, Bobby, I like to be a Jew.